I'm the city attorney.
Dan O'Loughlin, Captain over at Sheriff PD.
Taylor Giles, City Council.
Keith Campbell, City Manager.
Ty Hayden, the Chief.
Renee Browse, City Council.
Doug Scott, City Council.
Kim Young, City Council.
Yes, Kim Marshall with Project Homeless Connect.
Dan Stanley, City Council.
Tim Rosner, Mayor, and so we're talking about time, place, and manner, and Kim met Kim for a good while, talking about some of the challenges we're facing in organizations you represent. We thought it would be great to have you meet today, share your experiences you're seeing in other regions, areas of Washington County. So thanks for being here.
Of course, thank you.
All right, now that that's out of the way.
Just want to restate for the public, this is a conversation regarding House Bill 3115 that came about in the 2021 legislative session. This is a conversation that the legislature has required all cities to have to update their code. And so we are in the process of getting that done in Sherwood. The last meeting, I talked a little bit about the case law history of that. I'm not going to go through that again, but I do have 3115 on the screen, and I will read that for the public. It's that cities they may regulate the acts of sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outside on public property, so long as the regulations are objectively reasonable, based on the totality of the circumstance as applied to all stakeholders, including persons experiencing homelessness. And so what that basically means in layman's terms is that if a city has a camping ordinance that just outright bans camping in the city, the legislature has said that that's no longer allowed. So we need to update our code because unfortunately, from the history of that, we do need to update it because ours does not comply with 3115. So the conversation tonight, I sent you, yes, sir.
Sorry, that's gross. This was a little lost on me, at least until the very end of our last work session. So I want to get clarity here. Reading what you have on the slide. This House Bill 3115 applies only to public property.
That's correct.
So any of our camping ordinances around private, publicly accessible private property would still be fine the way they are written. We don't have to change those.
Yes,
We
sir.
don't want to. Okay.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yep, that's a good question. So with that being said, council directed me last time, we talked a little bit in the abstract on this, and council directed me to go back and say, hey, find out what other cities around us are doing. And so I've done that. North Plains leads the way. They're the only ones with an ordinance adopted right now. I've sent that out to you all. I'm not going to go into significant detail on what every city's doing because that is subject to change. And I'm happy to talk about that a little bit, but all of these cities are either just getting started or in the early stages of adopting these ordinances. So we are all in the same boat. We are all having challenging conversations about what it looks like. Tonight, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about the detail of time, place, and manner restrictions. So the where, when, and how. So the time, for instance, Beaverton's where they're leaning right now is an 8 to 8 camping, allowing camping. So from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. you would be allowed to camp in certain areas. As you saw in North Plains, is 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. So we can take this however you all want to talk about it. I want it to be your discussion and not mine. This is a robust policy question that is left to elected officials. Happy to weigh in on the legality of stuff, but I would like to start it out saying, is there a consensus or is there maybe a discussion that you would like to have on a time restriction for camping?
I like 7 a.m. better than 8 a.m. School start time and stuff like that.
Okay.
I mean, my only thought with that is, does that create a burden on the police at 7 a.m.? I don't know what the practical effect is of that, right? If we say, okay, you got to be out of here by 7 a.m. or do we have, you know what I mean? Like that's, I also am in agreement with earlier, but is it just a time thing or are there other, I mean, we talked about potentially there being like a designated area. We talked about, which I don't think we were totally in favor of. In fact, we saw some other problems with that. And so Is the time thing the main thing that we're discussing?
No, sir. So we're going to talk about time, place, and manner. So
Okay, all right.
the time is just what I brought up first to the
Okay.
extent that you wanted to hash that out. That seems like a fairly innocuous, if there's an easy decision to make here, that may be leaning towards the easier of it.
I
Right,
think the
but-
place for me is gonna determine,
The time.
help me determine the time.
yeah, but I mean, so could I say, hey, you can legally camp from, again, just being absurd here, but from midnight to 12:05, right? I mean, like, is that?
That, so
Has to be
That would not be
reasonably
objectively
objective.
reasonable.
that's the answer. The answer is
Okay.
yes, you could say that, but you would likely get sued and you would lose to the
Well, okay, but
objective.
where's the line then? Does it have to be an 8-hour window, a 3-hour window?
No, it does not. It has to be objectively reasonable. And so, and I'll talk about this again, because normally objectively reasonable is a legal term applied to use of force. In that question, what is objectively reasonable is generally left to judges and juries. The legislature has said, cities, you figure out what it means to be objectively reasonable, and if somebody has a problem with it, then the judges and juries can figure it
Okay.
out. So they've left it to the elected officials to take a shot at it.
Okay,
So can I make a suggestion?
Yes,
Yeah, 'cause- so time, place, and manner, the last time we kind of said, we talked about the times. You know, we didn't land on a time, that's kind of what you're getting to. We also talked about having areas in the city where you can camp, areas in the city where you can't camp. We'd had a conversation like school walk zones. We set up bubbles of area or, you know, those types of things. The manner, you know, I think that gets into more of how many square feet, what you can have in those types of issues. But I think kind of within that context, I mean, I would like, instead of kind of diving right into this, we have some folks visiting. I would love the chance for them to just kind of give their perspective on what they're seeing in other communities. And when I talked to you briefly at the symposium, and you talked to Kim, it's really interesting insights about how our households community thinks about these things that might be useful for us to hear. I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, no.
I mean, I was boiling.
And for those, the reason why I reached out to Kim, knowing that she was Project Homeless Connect, also a Sherwood resident, so she knows what our Sherwood folks, you know, how they might adapt to some policy that we make, or that she also wants us to do things compassionately, and, so,
Right.
go ahead.
Okay, great.
So this is, please recognize that my work is advocating for our homeless friends, but I fully recognize the impacts of this on other people. And as I talk, you're gonna hear a lot around my concern for businesses, because many cities are saying not on city property, which then means public property, which could land in front of businesses. Our three big cities, Tigard, Beaverton, and Hillsborough, all look a little different right now, which is frustrating as well. When this came about, when we all heard about it and realized we had a July 1 deadline, the goal, the hope was that we were gonna come up with one ordinance that fit 14 different areas, one county and 13 cities. It turns out that's not gonna happen. We're gonna have 14 different ordinances, which in itself is its own challenges, particularly for a place like Beaverton, where you can be standing on a street corner of Beaverton and take 2 steps to the right, and now you're in unincorporated Washington County. And so the impacts just kind of are really, really vast, and then law enforcement comes into play. And for us, law enforcement is not the first point of contact when it comes to our homeless friends. We want our outreach teams to be that first point of contact. Now, Sherwood doesn't have a designated outreach team, but that's a whole other conversation. So right now, what we know is the county is looking at what we would consider, we being the advocates for the homeless, the most compassionate plan. They're looking at 5 days. You may camp in this spot for 5 days. And then they have their manor piece of it. So you can have a tent, you can have this big of a footprint type piece. Most of the cities are doing some overnight type camping. So Beaverton is 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Hillsborough is sun down to sun up type stuff. One of our biggest concerns is the pieces on either side of those. So if, like in Beaverton, they were say 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. and their shelter, sheltered library doesn't open till 10 a.m. What's expected in those 2 hours? The other piece that we have to consider, and I know that this is where we have to stretch ourselves, is the population that we're talking about. If we're gonna be empathetic and client-centered and trauma-informed, we have to consider beyond some of what might be reasonable to us. Some of our homeless friends aren't gonna get up at 7 o'clock and go. So are we just saying, we know you're not gonna follow this, now we have to engage law enforcement, which to me becomes unreasonable, and that's a piece that has to be considered. So my ask is just lean in with a little compassion and recognize who this ultimately affects, because the who is really important. That's gonna be our homeless friends. Secondary is gonna be law enforcement. Where this is what happens with an ordinance, is we're saying, we're gonna mandate something, so now there's gonna be guidelines, and if you don't follow them, something has to happen. And what is that gonna look like, chief? What kind of enforcement will be in play? And then, gosh, we would just love if any two cities could come together and have similar ordinances, just any two cities, to show us collaboration. That would be amazing, because that's just that's a big picture concern for all of us when we're making decisions. And in one county, Washington County, we can't collaborate in that way. That's a whole other world. And so that's what I'm asking. I know that there's concern about, picking one spot. I don't have as much of a concern. That doesn't, raise much for me here, because in Sherwood, when we look at point in time count numbers, you don't have to take off your shoes to get to a high number. Very few friends are here in Sherwood camping. We don't have a lot of resources. We don't have shelter anymore. And so having one spot where people might congregate, you could put a number limit on that once it gets to X number, we go to Plan B and have another spot available. Now, again, I'm gonna go back to, the county is proposing a 5-day ordinance. I'm gonna guess most of my friends are going to go where they can stay for 5 days. That's just a guess, particularly if they know that there's gonna be enforcement connected to this. Another big concern is, like I said, our businesses, Main Street and Tigard is already struggling. People are, now they're gonna be public property, so here I go, now I'm gonna squat in front of this business, and how is it gonna affect them? I don't know what our concern is for businesses here in Sherwood, if we see that a lot, if we see friends right in front of business properties, but it is a concern that we should be talking about. So for me, the easy one is manner. Because we're not just gonna say you can have a pillow and a sleeping bag, and if we are, then we need to step back and have a different conversation. It's Oregon, we need to be reasonable again, so a tent is kind of necessary,
Yes,
even if it's
right.
even if it's only for 12 hours. You do get specific around what heat looks like, because we don't want fires. So defining that is really important. But there's just such a level of compassion around this that is easy to move away from when we're talking about things like enforcement and laws and those types of things. Because who this impacts is really important.
I have a question for you. In your conversations in other communities, kind of going toward law enforcement, in my experience with our law enforcement moving right along, especially with them, I was amazed at how well they understood the circumstance of the individuals they were dealing with, from someone who's really trying to someone who's eating their right? How are other organizations doing? Because you can have an ordinance, but then there's discretion within the police department based on that kind of compassionate view. What's going on with that individual? Am I going to enforce? What am I going to do? What are the communities? Are they trying to be more prescriptive about it, or are they giving a tool set to their PDs?
I think they're giving a tool set to their PDs, and I think Chief could speak into that, like in Hillsborough, we have our CIT officers, in Beaverton, they have their bike police and stuff, who already know a lot of the faces. Same here in Sherwood, our officers already know the faces of those that are homeless in this community. So it's not a rebuild of relationship, they already have that relationship. So now it's, hey, this is the guidelines, how do we help you follow them? Or what else could it look like? Where I'm gonna get stuck is this objectively reasonable continuously, because our friends are smart. And I can see them finding the gray in some of this, which then leads us down a whole path that we don't want to get down. So I think that Chief will say, yeah, let's just build relationship and say, hey, friend, let's move you over here. This is, this is allowed, this is not allowed, and what can that look like? Versus just going to enforcement and having to make the harder decisions.
Because if I recall, Ryan, if we don't enforce our ordinance and we've allowed, then let's say we just let somebody somewhere for 72 hours, then it becomes a whole different thing, right? It becomes like an eviction process, or what is that all about?
No, this is another, as you said, I think the word gray is appropriate. The legislature has not, so they use this term established campsite. And the legislature has failed to give us a definition of what an established campsite is. So-
Case law that's-
That's correct. And so what they have said is if it is an established campsite, one thing, we're not talking about 3124 tonight, but one thing that HB 3124 did is it said, hey, instead of a 24-hour notice to move, it's now 72. So if there's an established campsite, you got 72 hours notice before you can move that campsite.
So who does that establish? Can we just throw this back in the legislature's face and say, take another stab at it?
Well, and Kim, to the question, so let's say we do put a 5-day ordinance in, and then they have to move, does Washington County say how far away they have to move? Like, could they literally be moving around
So
the field? Like, if we said, hey, that field over there is our camping area, they could just, and so I guess what I'm saying
It's
is.
kind of like the chalk marks on a car tire.
Right, and frankly, it also, oh, sorry, do you have an answer to that one?
yeah, I think I can specifically answer
Okay.
that. So one of the amendments to 3124 says that you cannot cite somebody or take an enforcement action if they're within 200 feet of a posted campsite. If you just post a 72-hour notice and they move 200 feet away, you can't just go over there and issue a citation. So there is this 200-foot buffer around.
So
Okay.
they can
but
move
the pro-
200 feet and they're good again for another 5 days.
So if
Yeah,
they're within the
so-
200 feet, then you can cite them. If they're outside the 200 feet, you can't.
Yeah, but so in my mind, that, I mean, so, and this is, part of the practical effect, as somebody who worked downtown for a long time and had a lot of good and bad interactions with homeless people, I would say that the smartness, as you say, or to the ability to get around something like that, it's hard because you want to be compassionate, you want to get them to the services that are actually going to help for the people that want those services. But to do that in code and law is very, very difficult, right? And so then I also, our particular business shut down our office there because none of the employees were feeling safe out front. And so I go, well, that's not very fair to the people who were trying to, the lunch area started shutting down and we start seeing this cascading effect where now Portland's, I just saw REI is shutting down today. They're big, so I go, oh, well, how many other jobs are being affected by this because of this problem? Instead of saying, okay, here's a way that we can work together in partnership with the homeless community to say, yeah, we can't have the shenanigans. We have, you know what I mean? Like we can't play both games. We can't say we're going to be compassionate and help you and you can do whatever you want, right? Because I feel like that's the tension here where I'm trying to figure out a middle ground that is compassionate but doesn't get taken advantage of.
So I have a clarifying question, and because you mentioned our businesses, our restaurants and stuff. So for instance, like Target, all the shopping malls over there, those would be considered private property.
That's correct.
So if they don't want camping, they can say we don't want camping.
Yes.
So the business.
Well, we have
It's
an
not
ordinance
that they-
against it.
They can't even say they will allow it. Our ordinance says you can't camp.
Right. So, like Walmart's a great example.
Right.
Yeah, so they changed their tune from what they did 10 years ago. I'm just trying to understand it, because when we think about businesses, what businesses in town could be potentially.
What about a doorway on Old Town?
Sidewalks.
Yeah,
Well,
is that,
sidewalks you can do.
I didn't think
Issues.
the right of way has to remain clear.
Right, that Portland has right-of-way laws, and that's not being.
We're not-
So I do want to make that distinction. We are not Portland. Washington County is not Portland, and it's not that we don't cross over and have friends that sometimes come over to our county and friends that go back to that county. But the demographics and just the pulse is very, very different than particularly downtown Portland. And so let's put that on the table. And then the other thing I want to put on the table, again, I'm going to speak to Washington County, is more often than not, research shows that our homeless friends are the victims of hate crimes than they are the perpetrators. So just because we're having a public meeting, I at least want to just put those on the tables that, I was at the City of Tiger today and they have an issue around the chamber with some graffiti and stuff. And at first, the community assumed it was homeless friends and it isn't. That's not really what they do. They don't graffiti. But it's easy to go, oh, it was them that we're gonna point out, that was them. And it's not. And I think that I think you said it, we don't wanna do established camps, we don't want, I might, but you guys don't want to do an ordinance where it allows anyone to get too established. Because what we also know about our friends is that they'll start to hoard and bring more stuff and it becomes an issue. And so can there be enough time for someone to set up and tear down in a reasonable limit, with a small footprint in a space that makes sense, that is, within certain distances of schools and those types of things, considering all the pieces. And that's what it kind of gets down to. And can it be more than 8 to 8? Absolutely it can. I would say that if we can find a spot that is away from schools and stuff, then consider that, just what we know. Our friends aren't up at 7 taking a shower and getting ready for work. And so having that pass. And they also aren't camping. Right, they're also not camping. They don't have one backpack with all their stuff and they're going for a hike. It's a little different than that. And so there's just these pieces that we have to consider in this, all the while knowing that come July 1st, it's gonna be frustrating.
But Kim, to what end though? If we say, okay, you have 24 hours to camp, you can get up and down whenever you want, to what end? We don't have the facilities, we don't have the mental health, we don't have the detox, we don't have, or whatever it is, even the family services we don't
Well,
have.
I think that's why it's not gonna be a big issue for Sherwood. We need to find a place that when the few that come here, they have a place.
Well, I get, that brings me back to a question that I think we spent a lot of time last session, kind of all walking down the path, having a designated site, and then toward the end, we kind of all flip-flopped to not having a
Well,
designated
she
site,
thought it
so.
wouldn't be the best idea.
And then we were worried about the establishing of a permanent camper, so
Yeah.
I'm trying to, maybe that's what we need to decide first, maybe not.
Like the where.
But even if it is a permanent campground, and you say, even 5 days, right? 5 days you could be here, but then you have to go out of city limits for a day or whatever.
I'm not signing up for 5 days.
No, I'm just saying, if we took your total ask of being what Washington County is saying, to what end, right? Is it just so that they can have a break from another city, you know what I mean?
Well, I
I
think
don't
there's
understand.
2 answers. One is, I think it's so that we don't have too much of an established campsite. So we don't get too comfortable, get too much stuff. We have to be able to kind of pick up and go, not leaving too much of a footprint behind for whoever to clean up. And then the other piece of it is, and I'm so glad you asked because this allows me to at least put this on the table. And I talked to Kim about this. The Metro bond and the supportive housing services funding that is coming through is allowing us to do life-changing work. We're finally there. We're finally at the place where we have the funding to do the work that we need to do. So to at what end is to the services. And so we still have gaps, mental health, addictions, those are things. It's coming online in 2024. It might not be the end all. We might need, more of these, it's called the Center for Treatment and Trauma and Treatment. We might need one in each city. But we have one coming, and that's a huge leaps and bounds from where we were, so that's really exciting, it's gonna, in Beaverton area. And so, so that's gonna help us address, if someone says, I'm ready, I want a detox, great, we have a bed for you. Because right now, we don't have that option, we can go to downtown Portland and wait in line at Hooper at 6 a.m. So we're at a place where we're having a complete systems change here in Washington County. We finally have the funding to do the work that's needed so that we can answer that question with the appropriate services as we continue to build it. And so one of the things that came out of my conversation with Kim was, I was like, we don't have a designated outreach team for Sherwood. And that would really be beneficial to have one or two people engage with law enforcement, have a better understanding of who's here, even though it's a small number, it's still important, and start to figure out what steps can we take, what can we move towards, are you ready for shelter, do you want to be in a motel room, are you ready to talk about housing, could we just at least start to build that relationship to figure out where we could go. Just at Project Homeless Connect today at my staff meeting, they told me that we've housed 86 people. And last year, that's huge, and we're just one small agency, and so good things are coming from this Metro Bond funding, so those services are gonna be available, and we're gonna keep doing it over time. And so, and I'm not asking anybody to do 5 days. I realize the county is different, and they can make that kind of ordinance. it's saying, this is what we're gonna do, and then
Right.
looking at me and saying, now, how do we fill some of these gaps, Kim? Help us figure out how we get an outreach worker here, what are the services available, how do we connect people appropriately?
Yeah, and Kim, I love that. So I've met many homeless people, but I have met a fair number of them that have said, I don't want help. This is a lifestyle that I'm living and I'm doing it. You know, all these other places have too many
So
restrictions.
multi-pronged
and stuff
approach,
like that.
right? It has to be
Oh, yeah,
all the
100%.
things,
It's very,
including
very hard.
a safe
Yes.
place to sleep.
Okay,
It has to be all the things. And then our hope is if we can come up with some safe places for
Yeah.
people to sleep, if that's safe parking, an RV park, safe camping someplace, sanctuary camping type stuff. Which I don't know if we'll ever get to, but if we can meet that need and say, cool, we totally understand, build a relationship. And maybe get to a point where we say, you ready for the next step? Could we talk about, what could be next? Or we just continue to listen to our friends and meet them where they're at and figure out how we do it safely.
Well, on the outreach team piece, in my mind, that's an area where, because of our low volume here, we partner with our surrounding cities, potentially something like that. And there's probably some opportunities on that path as well, but you mentioned the extreme case, I don't want any help, I'm being.
Oh, yeah.
concerned. But I think gets back to the point I was making earlier, is this is why our police department needs tools, because there are gonna be times where enforcement becomes an issue, because the person's not changing behavior, or not moving, or not, causing a nuisance or something like that.
well, and frankly, we even talked last time about it. For me, it's a different thing when, it's, a family in their car because of bad luck and job or, stuff like that versus this is my lifestyle and I'm going, and I understand it's a very, very complicated problem, but in Sherwood, is there a way to codify it so that it's simple and it feels like this is a Sisyphean task of something that's gonna.
Well, we think we're maybe trying to overcomplicate it a little bit. Like, I think if we start with something like we all realize that the challenges here in Sherwood are gonna be pretty small, at least for now, right? So I think if we start with something that covers the things we need to cover, if we learn through time that we need to change the code, add to the code, make it more complex, then we can do that. But
Can we do that?
can't-
Hold on, can we do that
Of course
though?
we
Or
can.
is this the kind of thing where,
No.
I started camping here when it was the old law, so I'm grandfathered in?
No, you can change the law.
If
Okay.
we had a partnership with a church or a nonprofit or something that said, sure, from 8 to 8, you can use this part of our parking lot behind whatever, what does that, it doesn't have to be public property, right?
No.
We just have to have a place that says, here, you can come here.
That's correct, Counselor Young, and Beaverton is actually doing that with their safe
Safe
parking program. They're working with faith-based organizations, with some nonprofits. And they have some rules in place that not yet, but they're working toward making parking available for families, for people that need it.
But that doesn't solve all the problems, because they still have to allow people who don't have cars to be somewhere, so.
And that's their time, place, and manner that they've done. So that's where the time.
There's restrooms and there's garbage and all
Safe
the
park,
other.
safe parking has restrooms,
Do they?
garbage,
Oh,
and
okay.
storage connected to it, and case management.
Yeah, and there's, in talking to the mayors about this, in our Washington County Mayor's meeting, a couple of points I'll bring up. Jeff Dalen over in Cornelius, they have a much bigger problem. And one of the things he noted on the Times thing is they have a lot of working homeless. So expecting someone to get up at 7 a.m., pack their camp up and go to work, and vice versa, is burdensome to those folks. So this comes in all forms, right?
Yeah, but even what you're saying though, there, like, that's almost the opposite of, it feels like there's 15 different types of people that we're trying to solve a problem for, right? Or
Well,
maybe,
I
like,
agree, and just go back to what Dennis said, and this is my opinion, obviously.
Okay.
I think we have a very low level problem right now, I think we have an obligation to do this because of state statute. And just to remind everybody and people listening, this started with a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that SCOTUS upheld, which has its own complications in terms of we have to find a spot for them in the city limits. We can't partner with Tualatin to find a joint spot, which is kind of crazy. You get that resolved, but I think I like what you said. I think we should keep this fairly simple, use some tools to this part. You know, up until now, you guys have been doing a great job of dealing with this challenge. You know, you've been compassionate, you understand who you're dealing with and what the appropriate course is. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think we can keep it simple. We got to change it.
And I need to jump in because you're right, historically, we've been very local. We know who they are. They're local. They have a tire connection to family here for the most part. Now, we get the occasional passed out on the bus, got off on the line in town. Everyone that we've ever contacted in that manner, they just want to get back. They want to get back to Beaverton, a bigger hub where they have a little bit more of their connection with some of the people they hang out with. You know, historically, I've lived here 28 years, been doing this for 29. We both came from big agencies, Beaverton and Hillsborough. So I know how this can manifest and grow in those, but it was all driven around transit. It's all driven around services, and that's where they congregate. I'm not saying it will never get here, but I say, you know, right now, we do a really good job. And to your point, Mayor, our officers, I mean, they've been over backwards to get them places, get them food. What can we do? How can we serve you? And you touched on a team, and one of the things that I've been floating around, are you familiar with our mental health response team? So we only have one right now in the Tri-Cities. I really think it's something that we need to maybe look at is bringing on a second team. Almost not quite 24 hours, but 20 hours out of the day, because this team knows all of these individuals. Because as you know, they're in Tigard and Tualatin, Sherwood and Beaverton, and so they're making those connections and they're understanding it way better than boots on the ground police officers are. So they know if it's a mental health challenge, if it's an addiction challenge, if it's you know, whatever, they've really gotten ingrained with these people. So they're a pretty valuable resource for us. If I were to propose something where we had connections out there and be able to provide services, because we don't have services here, but I know this team, and Captain can speak to this as well, is they really go out of their way to make sure that this is where you can go, this is what you can get, this is how we can help you, and they follow up with it on a regular basis. So
For those that don't know, did you explain the Tri-Cities?
oh yeah, so the mental health response team it includes Sherwood, Tualatin, and Tigard, and the city we also support. And it's just a rotating officer with a clinician. So we go to any of the higher end mental health halls out there, but we also connect them with anybody that we're running into out on the street. If we run across somebody that's we don't recognize, we pretty much know everybody's here. You pick up on them pretty quickly, we'll interact with them and try and find out what we can do to provide a service for them. So we're not facing it. And I think a lot of it's driven by the fact that we have one line that comes here, kind of the dead end of TriMet. So I can remember several times people don't want to be here. They're like, I don't know where to go. It's kind of boring. Nothing's going on. So,
That happened on my last ride line.
Yeah, say that happens with my kids.
So I'm curious, since our last work session, have you or your officers given any thought of a place that might be applicable that to say this is where we want to send people that have a tent or can sleep on a bed? What?
Well, I think in the last one, even then, is the people that are coming here, they kind of disappear. They know where they can go. They know the parks that they can get to. They know the buildings they can be behind and be out of sight. And for us, you know, out of sight, out of mind is a good, I mean, we're not out there looking for the law enforcement side, because I get it. I mean, we're not gonna be, we're not, unfortunately, we have to be a part of this piece because there's an enforcement nexus, but ultimately it's the services and them getting where they need to go or the services that they need. So when they come into our community and they are here, They go and they have places and
I get that, but
Are
our
you
ordinance
comfortable with
needs,
that?
our ordinance
Yes.
needs to say something, and if that's the case, that would mean they can stay anywhere, but
well, a lot of it's private property that we know. I mean, okay, so we know they hit Stellos, we know they get back and tuck in. They actually, to your point, Washington County, right across the street there, from Safeway, you know, that's all county back in the streets. We know that they've been back in there as well.
but
So I
when the,
think we have to specify where they can go. We can specify where they can go, right? We can't be in the public right away. It can't be within 500 feet of a school, and then call it good until we need to change it.
Yeah, because it is.
so what does that do for somebody wanting to put a tent up in the middle of Schneider Park?
Park rules will, during the day, would enable someone to in essence be in, but once park hours are done.
Oh, we can enforce
Then
our
you can
park
enforce,
rules,
yeah.
okay.
So most of the cities have this same question and same issue that evolves during the day. Some people find it offensive that a homeless person is in my nice park. And it's like, well, they have every right to be there, laying there in a sleeping bag, just as you have every right to be there, laying in a $300 Costco reclining chair, right? So it's the time though. that
So we could set the time to
Yeah,
be,
and that's another piece that's really frustrating about this, is who trumps who? What, you know, do park rules trump the ordinance or HOAs? How do they, or CCNRs, how do they play into this? There's so many areas that we're like, well, then who gets to decide which?
So if you look at it, park rules and your park rules, and you can speak to this probably better, but park rules are gonna be the park rules. What you need to look at is those aspects of a tent that pops up on the boulevard and a residential street in the middle of Woody. You have to look at the tent that pops up on the public piece of property that's outside of the business. There's three sides to this. You have residential, you have business, and then you have, as Kim says, and Kim and I have worked together for a long time. You have your friends in regards to their needs. But it's not a one prong. It's not just what our friends need, it's what your business community needs and what your residential needs. And because if you don't serve all three masters, the police department does get, and the city and city council get inundated in regards to your residential and your business getting affected. So to go to your point, sir, in regards to, and back to yours, in regards to time, time is an important piece of this. While all those other prongs are important, time is very important. And while our friends will always want to have more time, just as Kim said, and there's parts of all of us that want that too, we have to serve that need also of the residential for having that tent in front of on the residential street getting taken down versus outside of a business on the grassy boulevard out front. And sometimes I don't like getting 5:30 in the morning to have to go to work, but sometimes I do. So you have to look at that, and sometimes having that time ability for us, and it came up, I think, at the start, in regards to what helps the police department. As we get deeper into the day, we end up getting more complaint calls in regards to homeless people and or people with mental health issues. And so the earlier in the day when we can deal with those things, and then the city starts to wake up and evolve, et cetera, and go about its business. We've had to be able to move someone on earlier on because they haven't left by 7 a.m. or 6:30 a.m. We have that ability to get that process going.
What are our park hours?
sun up to sun.
Dusk to dawn.
So if we had a time, whether it be 8 PM to 8 AM, then between 8 AM and 8 PM, somebody couldn't put a tent up in a park.
Parks are different. They could.
They could.
They could.
But at night, they wouldn't be able to sleep in the park.
If I was you, I'd put parks on a little island of discussion pieces. Your biggest things that you're trying to figure out are helping out, but the kind of the more grassy boulevards and the public property. areas,
Yeah, really right of way stuff is pretty important. Like we talked about in front of businesses, and so we get into the manner side of it, which I think Kim, you said that may be the easier part of the discussion, right? And I tend to agree with you with respect to some of it, because the statute allows you to limit open fires, for instance, so that's a really easy question to solve. We talked about ADA restrictions last time, so Like certainly if somebody puts a tent up that's blocking the sidewalk, that's problematic, not only for businesses, but for folks that may be disabled, or
course.
folks that just want to walk down the street.
Not even just a tent, just
Yeah.
sleeping on the
Correct.
sidewalks.
So, go ahead, I'm sorry.
The broader you have your timeframes and your manners and that, then it becomes more of a challenge for us from our perspective, for law enforcement, to be able to get that compassionate enforcement process, right? So I love Kim, but I kind of look at it a little differently. I look at it as when the restrictions are a little more restricted in regards to time, place, and manner, it enables us to be able to move things along when we have the more problematic person that we're dealing with. When we have the people that need the compassion, need the resources, need the help, gives us the ability to be compassionate and be able to help and give them those opportunities to stay longer, get squared away, got a couple extra hours, et cetera. The longer timeframes, the bigger the places, et cetera, that causes us more problems with problem people.
I think to me, from a place standpoint, right away, I'm kind of thinking in the prohibiting versus designating where we allow, right? So if we say you can't stay in the anywhere in the public right away, anywhere within 10 feet of a doorway, I don't know, something like that. Just making this up on the fly a little bit.
X amount from the school zone.
Yeah, and certain out from the school zone, and then the rest of it's the rest of it. You know,
What
it
if-
sounds like the people where they're going now isn't really problematic, and that wouldn't prevent those places, so.
Well,
But if
if it's
the
county
business-
land, that's 5 days anyway, you know, if it's behind Safeway there.
What if business allows a person to say?
Well, that would be-
Technically, that would still be a violation of city code. There's a
Oh, this
provision
doesn't-
for a variance there, but our code as it stands now does not allow camping private property without variance.
And then this, just remind me, or maybe, this is all based on shelter beds being available or not available.
Yes, so the crux of the law says that unless someone has somewhere to go, right? If somebody has a place to go, you can make them move. If there is no place for a person to go, you cannot restrict their ability to sleep.
Does
That's the
place-
definition.
Does the place to go mean have to be a shelter bed, or can you say this part of town you can't?
This part of town, you can't.
Okay.
That was a Boise versus Martin.
It was and extended in the Blake v. Grants Pass case. We talked about that a little bit last time, and so with that being said, and I know I'm cognizant of time, we have 15 minutes, and it's been a great policy discussion. But I would like to get some traction, because the next time we meet, I would like to bring you all something to look at. And so with respect to that, we've talked a lot about time, we've talked a little bit about manner. But
I
you
like
all,
Deb's suggestions.
and Doug, would you repeat that? I have right away, 10 foot in front of the doorway, and then school zones.
And the 10 feet was just a number. Like,
Sure.
it could be 20, could be whatever is the right number. I'd let the experts weigh in on that. It was just-
I mean, I'd love for you to work with Captain.
So, yeah, and so the police has been great. I mean, Ty, it's done a great job. I went on a ride along today with one of our sergeants kind of around town looking at these areas. And I think it's a blessing that we couldn't find any folks that were experiencing homelessness. That, again, that does not mean that they're not there.
Well,
But-
they go tuck themselves behind trees, because they too don't want to be out there,
Yeah.
really. I
Well,
mean, they know.
So if we did, is that sufficient to do a draft? I worry that there wouldn't be a place in, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of want to see a map to say, okay, well,
So
here's
we can
some
refine
public
that.
land.
We can refine that
Okay,
as part of the draft process, yeah.
I think so. So all the law requires of you right now is that you not outright ban camping. That's what the law requires.
okay.
However, there's been some demonstrated will of the council to go a little bit further and put things in place. And so that's really what we're here to talk about, is how much further do you want to go and what do you want that to look like?
Well, I think, one of the reasons I mentioned looking at the school block zones is,
Do you
Not-
bring that map up?
yeah, that'd be great. And I'm not suggesting this is the end all be all, but from a perception point of view, our community knows that we have a camping as it stands today. Now we're gonna be lifting that to some degree. I think you need to be thoughtful for the community wants around that too, so. Solution zones and stuff like that, I think it's important. So that's where my will to take this a little bit farther comes from, because if we just lift the ban, we're gonna have community members going. What? You know,
This is
so-
a walk
Correct,
here.
But if there's no shelter beds available, then our friends have the right to camp wherever they so choose.
Is it shelter beds or another place that you can?
No, shelter beds.
So,
That's Boise.
so,
That's not, yeah.
so what the law says is that there are no beds to go to. You can't outright ban camping. So what and maybe I was confusing the way I answered your question. If you can ban certain places, but you can't ban the whole city.
Right,
So you can make somebody move from a certain place to another place.
that's what I was asking.
So if there's room to camp here,
Camp.
right, then we could say, okay, there's no beds because we don't have any beds in our city.
It's
But
not
you
just
could-
within, it's not just within, Sherwood.
I know, but I'm asking from a law standpoint, if I can say, you can go camp here.
You can't.
So, because I'm hearing different things from Kim. I'm hearing different things from you and from the lawyer, so I'm
So-
trying to figure this out.
So Ken, your position on this, and help me understand where you're coming from, you're saying that if there's shelter beds available in another jurisdiction, it's your position that we can ban camping outright in the city?
That is what 3115 is saying.
Okay, I
Hold on. You guys aren't saying the same
Let
thing.
let him
Okay.
finish his answer, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would want to take a closer look at that. That's not my understanding of what the law says, so I'd want to have a further conversation with you about that. And I think the League of Oregon Cities takes a different position as well.
I think
And
so.
that's what we want to do, so otherwise it's a moot point.
Right, we are wanting to restrict it around the schools and have camping essentially anywhere else besides that. Yes.
No.
That's right.
Within the realm of what we talked about, private property, camping,
Sure.
right? It's basically, it's the right of ways and city property, it's not parks, because we have those rules in parks.
So this is the walk zone, is that correct? Remind-
Those were my attempt to meld 5 different maps together from the school. to
Okay,
show
and
the
that-
current
and that's
walk
fine.
zones. Yeah,
Remind me of where St. Francis is on this map,
so this is
because
not,
I would not want to see St. Francis excluded.
yeah, we mentioned that in the last meeting, because
Right, I
we
just
don't,
wanna
the
make
charter school's not
Just to
included on
remind
there.
us
so
that
it's
that's where I'm
included.
Okay.
We could talk about preschools, do we want to set like a bubble in preschool?
You wouldn't want them excluded as being part of the walk zone?
Being able to allow,
You would want them to be able to allow.
correct.
Yeah.
Doesn't this only apply to?
Oh, if they,
But
if they chose to.
Oh, that's
If they
private
chose to,
property, so you
yeah.
can't do that
I
anyway.
just was
Yeah,
asking a clarifying question.
except that our camping ordinance doesn't allow that too.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Well, that's
they're-
gonna
They're
change.
not allowed
that.
to.
but I keep hearing,
So
even if somebody wanted somebody to sleep in their own doorway, that you're saying that they'd have to get a variance.
So that's
Like our
correct.
current law.
Yeah.
Our current law doesn't allow camping, period.
But we also established at the beginning of this that we weren't, whatever we're talking about here doesn't impact our private property.
Well, except I'm just hearing people saying
That's
yes.
all. That's what I thought I heard this, when I asked that question at the very beginning of this.
That's correct.
You said, anything we're talking about here doesn't impact our private property camping law at all.
It doesn't, you can make that.
Right, but it's not automatically happening, it's not part of this, right? So in that scenario, it would not be allowed.
We could have an exception for an organization that wants to set up
Yes.
some kind of
Sure.
camp up.
So any organization, like a church, that would want to allow it on their property, they'd have to go through a variance.
I
In
think
order
it's
to
a
get that.
process. Just- Not a necessarily variance, we just have a process.
So-
Yeah.
But that doesn't exist
Yes.
currently.
Yeah,
Right, so that's another conversation
That's
that I
another
think we need to have. In this conversation, I would say look at the ban and then we work towards other solutions, but I think the immediate need is of the ban, lift the ban.
without any other restrictions going in place.
At this point in time.
See, I don't know.
I'm not for that.
You mean you're fine with right of ways and,
I'm thinking, well, our problem right now is not very big. The people that we see camping are people mostly in cars with their.
but whatever we put in
kids.
place
I
now,
understand,
We can change.
I understand. It gives us more time to think it through, but to get an immediate reaction. But yeah, and then right of ways, I'd be fine with that too, not to camp right of ways.
Did you?
Can I add something to that? Washington County made change to the way they operated that in regards to lifting that. And like that, they popped onto county property, a massive camp that was uncontrollable. So just
Okay.
because you don't
It's not
have that
right
problem right now, if you lift it fully, and you don't have
Parameters.
some
in place.
parameters to it, I mean, like overnight, and the biggest is a camp that's as big as this building.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
just be aware that that may not happen here, but I've witnessed it.
So it sounds like hours will be part of it. There'll be some exclusion zones will be part of it for your ability to come back with something. We can debate the lines and all that. And manner, which I think was the easiest one.
Tent, no open fires. In fact, frankly, it's pretty dangerous to have cook stoves inside of a tent as well.
Yeah, and if it's something that we can have some draft language to point, an option for an organization like St. Francis to apply to be able to offer services.
Yes.
Is there
Or,
anything else?
When we come across it, we always bring this without it. Recognize that.
I
So,
just remember going back to the days when we used to let people, families, park line.
Yeah.
so from a process standpoint, I need some clarification on what you would like to see next. Because, we do have some time after the July 1st. I don't want to take too much advantage of that. I want to be cautious in how we do it. But at the same time, we need to come to a consensus soon. So do you want me to bring back a draft ordinance for a first reading? Do you want another work session? What would you like to see?
The draft work session.
Yeah.
I'd say,
Yeah, take what we have, take our officers' inputs, take
Can we throw out some times to give Ryan some direction?
8 PM to 8 AM.
dusted on.
So I hear Dustin on, I hear 8 PM to 8 AM.
I think Dustin on. That's harder because of the dawn part.
It'd be like 5 inch.
What was the police?
Not dusted on.
Yeah, that's good.
At one point of the year, it's very hard on our friends,
What's
and on the
dust?
other
What's
side
done?
of the year, it's extremely hard on your businesses, because they could be there till
Yeah.
after their businesses are open.
I was thinking.
So setting a time that's a narrow window of time to give us the ability to have the compassion to let that extend is the easiest thing. Chief, thoughts?
No, agree. Yeah, the hours are better, because there's just too many variables of what people do, dusk and dawn is.
8 to 7.
Okay, so an hour for the next work session?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
And as far as manner, like, I'm good with a
No
lot of
fires.
tent.
Can we just say
A
no
tent
fires?
is a lot.
Yes.
Well, and we have.
Can we define what's not allowed versus what is allowed? Because that list. is-
Yes, so like for instance, I'll give you a quick rundown, because I already have
You're
a,
right.
spoiler alert, I've already written a draft ordinance, I didn't want to. But here's the thing, so Beaverton, for example, has banned excavation, digging, removing shrubbery, right? Like erecting a structure other than a tent or a tarp, fires, things like that. Just really basic common sense stuff that we can put in there
Okay.
to make this work. So I will bring you what I
On a
have.
footprint size.
Yeah.
And what about like human waste and all that other stuff?
That's included in there, right? Feces, urination in public, I mean, those are still problematic, those are safety hazards that we can
Yeah, health
address.
hazards, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there gonna be an opportunity for public comment?
Yeah, yes, at the mayor's discretion, but certainly at the, ordinance.
Yeah.
But you're welcome to come back for our next work session.
Yeah, and
Well, I mean,
also,
I'm on Hillsborough, Beaverton, and Tigers,
I know.
all committees. Hillsborough is doing 3 all-day meetings with a group of 40 of us. Beaverton did a 1-hour Zoom call, so we've got the gamut of how, and we're all gonna end up
This
with
is,
different ordinances.
that people,
So it's sad.
the conversations that I've had with local governments, this is a struggle for each community. They're struggling with how to address it. It's a difficult conversation. So thank you for taking the time to talk with it. Thanks for being patient with me.
Our friends in Salem get very, very directed on things they shouldn't, and on things like this where they should, they leave less time to discretion.
It'd be helpful to have some.
that's the money, right?
So thank you, Ryan, and thank you so much for coming forward. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone for a great conversation. You got your marching orders.
I do.
Our work session is over.
And we will start tomorrow.